really excited to be here today, and not only to be part of the PSA, which has had an enormous impact on my own career development and on my journey to being here, but also for this midterm convention with a theme being the power of the other. So with associations like our own, it's very easy for us to kind of navel gaze and look inwards at what's happening within our association. But this year, the association has taken a different approach, which is to look outside of ourselves and to the value that it is we can bring to the market, to individuals and to organizations that are no doubt represented by those of you watching today, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the recorded sessions. We hope that you'll enjoy the tools that we've made, and please feel free to share them far and wide. And of course, to share the message of the PSASA, which is that we're an association that is here to support you in your professional development. So today we're talking about selling and how selling doesn't help, but helping does sell. Now, I find when working with speakers of all walks of life and all sorts of disciplines, that there are very distinct responses that come to the word selling. For those of us who work in sales or in marketing, we often approach this wide-armed. We're excited to talk about sales in any way, shape, or form. But when you speak to the speakers that present on topics outside of sales and marketing, well, you might be met with a less enthusiastic response. I'm hoping that after today's session, you're going to be persuaded that sales really is one of the best ways for you to increase your influence, to reach your particular target market and audience members, and indeed to help them. Let's take a look at a few of the statistics that have been recently made available as to what it is that our customers think of how we sell to them. Because if we're going to talk about how selling doesn't help, but helping does sell, I think it's good for us to take a step back and say, well, what is it that buyers are really telling us? We're going to move through this information quite quickly. So a series of studies were conducted by organizations like Forrester, CEB, and Serious Decisions. One of the questions that was posed to a couple of thousand B2B buyers, I think a couple of thousand, I'm not a statistician, but it was around 1,200 B2B buyers in the corporate environment, so this may differ from sector to sector. But one of the questions was, what percentage of the sales process that salespeople used to do are customers or buyers now doing for themselves? Remember, this was generic in a B2B environment. So for you, if you're listening as a speaker or facilitator or whatever walk of life and whatever organization you may be representing today, it's going to look a little bit different in your sector. And in fact, I think for those of us who work a lot online, like speakers, facilitators, and trainers do, the statistic may be even greater than this. But according to Forrester research of the buyers surveyed, 57% of the buyers responded that 57% of the job of selling, persuading, and engaging with the buyer, they're actually doing for themselves. So let's pause for a moment and think, what does that mean? What that means is, if you're going to reach your customers, then in order to reach your customers, you have to be doing more work online before you ever get to know them. Your LinkedIn profile has never been more important than it is now. Why? Because customers are doing much of the work before they ever talk to you. Investing in your website, while it used to be, not that long ago, 10 years ago, it was fine to have a static online brochure. What customers are looking for today as they visit your website and they look at other potential options on how to fill their time, your website has to fulfill a very specific set of criteria if it's going to be influencing and informing your customers before they ever get to talk to you, or you may not get the opportunity for that telephone call or for that conversation. Now, let's talk quickly about that conversation. The buyers that were surveyed in the CEB study were asked what percentage of conversations that you've had recently were considered a waste of time or were considered not valuable. What percentage of conversations that buyers are having do they consider not valuable? And the startling statistic was 89% of sales conversations are considered a waste of time by corporate decision makers. And the reason that that's such a startling statistic is, firstly, without any massive or significant improvement in your marketing, and of course, we're always looking at ways to improve marketing, but without doing that, by simply working more effectively with the seeds and the tools that you have, you're going to increase your conversion and you're going to have more sales. You're going to get in front of more customers that you can help. So let's talk about that for a moment, because both of the statistics that I shared with you here say one common factor or one common trait or characteristic, and that is you have to be visible. You have to be visible to your customers, and you have to be visible to them, not only visible for the sake of being visible, but visible to them in the context of what it is that you do. You cannot afford to be the best kept secret in your region or the area that you come from. We can no longer afford to be the best kept secret if you're part of South Africa, and I know we've got speakers joining the midterm conference here that are from abroad as well. But for those of you that are in South Africa or whatever region you're in, you can't afford to be the best kept secret in your country anymore. Because if you are a secret, you're not going to get in front of or visibility of or influence with the potential buyers who might be booking you now, or they may be booking you in the months and years to come. So that visibility and crafting a strong, clear, and direct reputation for your subject matter expertise are absolutely vital. And the second area in which you need to get visible is you need to be having enough meetings. If you're not having enough meetings with potential bookers, marketing directors, speaker bureaus, or agents, it's not likely that you're going to get the actual events and opportunities later. It's a cause and effect relationship. So you need to have the visibility, both at physical events and associations geographically, and then also those online. You need to have your visibility on your particular social media channels, and your website needs to be educating your customers. And that has to be converting into the meetings in which you are physically present with your customers, whether or physically present in a time-bound way, whether that's in person or online. I realize that could be a little confusing. So visibility is key. If you are working largely alone in your office and very few people know who you are, you're not going to get the visibility that you need to be able to reach and influence your customers. So again, this is one of the reasons why being part of something like the PSA is absolutely vital. I partook in the Women in Sales Awards as a panelist in the UK as a consequence of a speaker that I met, not in the South African Association, but in another association, and that was through the PSA. So those networks that we form, the relationships that we foster, the events that we attend, and the opportunities that we take, even if and I know this is a dangerous word, for exposure, are so important to developing our niche and our brand, also to increasing our visibility. Now, why am I harping on about visibility? Because ironically, although many of us like to be on stage, when it comes to other aspects of growing our brand, there are many of us who don't want to be visible. And there are those, and perhaps you guys can let me know in the chat if you can relate to this in any way. Has anybody ever felt like you don't want to self-promote? I don't want to be boastful. Just let me know in the chat if there's anybody that can relate to that, because that's something that I hear all the time. And part of what we do at the Sales Council, so we created Africa's first remote selling school, and we enable sales skills in blended methodologies through in-person keynote events, but also largely using online tools. And one of the things about videos is people don't want to use video. Why? They don't want to show their faces. So here's a little tip for you when it comes to showing your face in video. The only one that is surprised by what you look like is you. Okay, the rest of us have all seen your face and we're quite used to it. And so you've been getting it through your whole life with the face you have. Don't worry about video. Turn off self-view and just kind of get over it. And the reason I say just get over it, maybe that sounds a bit callous, is because the topic of today's talk is selling doesn't help, but helping does sell. In other words, putting a performance on. Of course, you want to present your most professional self. I think that goes without saying, but it's not a performance. It's you showing up in real time to talk dynamically to another human being about a real conversation. And that other human being is not as concerned about what you look like as perhaps what you might be. Okay, so you get to be professional, but you're not a news anchor and you're not auditioning for top model. And by putting somebody else's needs ahead of your own, you're actually going to get the courage to move past yourself. Last week I was doing some work with the Tycoon Tribe. They held an event called HybridCon, the first of its kind in South Africa. And the producer there, Nico, who used to be involved with DSTV and Mnet many years ago, so he's a real professional. And he says, Shelley, I remember seeing your first video in lockdown. Wow, that was terrible. You've come such a long way. But so what? Because there were so many other people that responded to the substance of what I had to say, and it was my willingness to show up and have my visibility that ultimately allowed to reach my customers. So thank you to those of you, Kirsten, Alison, Danette, who've let me know, okay, you guys can relate to this and you don't like this idea of self-promotion. What do you think about something? Human beings, part of our purpose is this going out and creating value in the world. Let me prove it to you. Creatures that are in the wild, birds, bees, bushbuck, and any other creatures, if they want to feed themselves, they go and find the food of their choice and they feed themselves. If a bird's hungry, it goes and finds seeds or worms or fruit or whatever it prefers. If a vulture is hungry, it goes and finds a carcass. But as human beings, we have to go through school, we have to learn a skill. And it's only with that skill that we can go into the world to create value. And it's in the creating of that value that we get to earn money and we get to meet the needs of ourselves and of our family members. So unlike other species, we actually need to go out into the world and create value in order to meet our needs. And I would argue that any system that doesn't rely on you getting off of your blessed assurance and going out into the world and doing something for somebody else, whether it's creating a product, whether it's delivering a service, whether it's being a counselor and listening to them, whether it's mowing their lawn, whether it's, heaven help you, you're a saint, looking after their toddlers, okay, whatever it is, we have to go out and create value in order for us to meet our needs. So when you don't want to be visible, you're simply saying, you know what, I'll think of an example, and it's probably not the best example to use, since I myself don't have any children and had never given birth, but I was looking at a video that was put up by a lady who does home births, natural births. What are they called? Somebody let me know in the chat. They're something mothers, I think. Midwives, thank you for the mimers. Yes. So I thought, but what an incredible, now what if that midwife, and doula, yes, that's the other term. What if they weren't letting anybody know about their products and said, I don't want to self-promote, so I'm going to let that woman give birth in absolute agony in a public facility that she probably doesn't want to or need to. Why would you do that? So what is it that your business does? What is every business set out to solve a problem in the market? And understanding your buyer or your avatar is about much more than a marketing exercise. It's about understanding who it is that you serve. And when you understand that, you'll get past your self-awareness and your nerves. Guys, I don't know if some people might argue I talk so much that this is very hard to believe. But I remember when I began in my career as a professional speaker, and I don't know if anybody else can relate to this. I wanted to be a speaker since I was about 5 years old. When other kids were singing in the backyard, I was talking to imaginary people, probably because of my exposure to going to church and watching sermons, okay? I actually once walked into a church on a Saturday morning and started talking to an imaginary audience. I didn't know then that women weren't allowed to be on the pulpit in English. I was definitely in the wrong church for that conversation. That's how long I've wanted to do what I do today. Went into radio. There were many other parts of my education that were perhaps not as obvious and that weren't formal, but they were part of my education. And yet when I started as a professional speaker, I was terrified. And for the first 18 months to 2 years, in fact, it took about 2 years before I got off of stage and experienced that high. And I still don't always experience it. It's often for me that right before I go on stage that I feel best. And afterwards you feel quite, you've given of yourself and you've really expended yourself and whatnot. But if I wasn't willing to get past that, I wouldn't be able to do what I do today. So if you understand that this is not about you, this is about your success, however. So I don't know for the international audience members that are attending, but I can tell you that pre-COVID, pre-2020, small businesses accounted for 47% of the jobs in South Africa. 47% of the jobs in our country, guys. So it is about you, but it's about your success and your willingness to get out there and help people. And as you do that, you'll find that you will meet the requirements of what buyers are looking for, which I'm going to unpack for you in just a moment. And by being more helpful, more visible, and more effective at it, guess what's going to happen to your income? Now, by the way, I'm not saying you should run your sales on a wing and a prayer, okay? And don't ever think that by helping people, tracking the metrics of sales don't matter. Metrics are a scorecard, and they're a very, very important scorecard. But what I am saying is that when you understand the problem that you're solving and you're sold out to doing it, and you understand how much customers are doing for themselves, you will, hoping, feel that sense of urgency in becoming that much more visible to your customers. So let's have a look at some other statistics. What percentage of executives believe salespeople are not prepared for their meetings? So sadly, that number is 63%. What do you talk about when you talk to your customer? Because when you are really concerned about somebody else's challenge, and guys, that's not always easy to do. It depends on the state you're in. It depends on how, to Charlotte's point, and just leading up to say how conscious you are. Every one of us can easily rush into a meeting being more conscious of what we need than what somebody else needs. Every one of us. There's no one amongst us that is so altruistic that somebody else's, our needs always come after somebody else's. But if you can just stop in that moment and remind yourself that the greatest key to your success is in being helpful, you will ask better questions. You will change your perspective going into that meeting. You will ask questions about the customer's problem. You will listen to their responses, and your next question will be that much more thoughtful or insightful because you're truly invested in what their challenge is. You see, bringing insight, and this is something I often say, we're starving in information, but starved of insight. But insight comes not only from education. Insight comes from education synergizing with your experience. So all of your knowledge, when you listen to a customer, when you really listen to them, you approach this to help, your knowledge then interacts with what their problems and the challenges that they're having, and you are able to give them insight into their environment. And that's something that differentiates you from others. And it's something that really helps your customers beyond, the talk that you're doing or the facilitation that you're delivering. Only 23% of executive buyers believe that salespeople can relate to their role. Don't be afraid to open your meetings with questions. So ask the event planner, what is most important to you in this event? How many years have you been involved with this event? What was the greatest success you've ever had? What was the biggest challenge you experienced? If you're talking to the stakeholder panel with inside the organization, then ask them the questions that relate to their role. If, as in my example, I'm working with sales leaders, I want to know what interventions have they run, where have they had success, what are the trends and patterns that they're identifying, what are the key problems, how have they tried to address those problems before? And I want to unpack all of those things before we begin to talk about what it is that what we can do and offer. In most B2B sales cycles, so depending on what you sell, and many of us in sales can become very season oriented, and there's nothing wrong with that, particularly when you're beginning, right? But for those of us that are at professional level, we all know we want to, as we see some of the iconic speakers here in the PSASA and of course in the PSA globally and in the other global associations, the best speakers are often booked about a year, 18 months to 2 years in advance. And in B2B sales cycle, most B2B sales cycles are taking 7 months or longer. So let's not be in a hurry. If we really want to help people, do what you need to do to increase your visibility, be genuinely helpful and insightful, craft your sales process around that, develop the empathy that you need, and also allow yourself the margin to help people that need it in the short term, but keep your eye on that big picture. Of course, that's maybe a conversation for a bigger day, and certainly the kind of conversation that we look forward to unpacking in one of our association events coming up soon.